Hey everybody, Charles Hoskinson here on April 25th, 2019 for another surprise AMA. The last AMA I did was kind of truncated as a result of the statements we made about the roadmap in Shelley. So I figured, it'd be probably a good idea to come back and talk to you guys for at least for another hour because, usually the AMAs are about 2 hours and you only got about an hour. So that's not really that fair. So in the interest of consistency, let's get to it. And I actually have tickets to go see Avengers Endgame tonight. I'm going to the 2:30 a.m. showing. It's the only one that was open, so this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be really, really tired tomorrow, but I've watched like 20 of these damn movies, especially considering that they're airplane movies. So I usually watch them while I'm flying across the sea, and I'm just committed. I'm a holder of Marvel. I have to finish it. Anyway, let's get straight to the questions, huh? What do you guys want to talk about? Can we have access to the Haskell course which you provided for Ethiopia and other places? So I've definitely been very interested in MOOCifying the Haskell course. Really the complication there is that the format for the Haskell course is really just in the minds of Lars and Paulina and the other teachers, as well as a lot of documents and PowerPoint slides. We did record some of the lectures, but they're not in a format that would be really desirable for a MOOC. It's almost like the old days of MIT courseware when they just recorded classes and they didn't really think too much about online consumption. So we have had some internal discussions about deploying those classes to some platform. For example, Udemy, we've already done a Marlowe and a Plutus trial class. The subscriptions are very strong. I think both are over 2,000. And we have fairly good ratings from Alejandro's class. That's the first time we've ever done that as a company. And for me, it's a return to the platform since 2013. So it's been 6 years. It's been a long time. Anyway, we will MOOCify those courses at some point. I hope we can get something out over the summertime. We actually have a gentleman named Jamie, who's a computational logician working for UIUC, who works under Lars, and his responsibility is online content. So nothing right now, but it is something that is a priority. And as we look at the feedback we've gotten from the 2 Udemy courses we've released, we should definitely be able to take it to the next level. We've also been planning to release a textbook in July for Plutus. And there's somebody who told us we might be able to do an O'Reilly programming book for Plutus and for Marlowe. So if that's the case, we'll definitely pursue that after we finish the book that we're committed to finishing in July. Okay. Ledger wallet support. We already support Ledger. Get with the times. Is there any security risk if I store my ADA in a Raspberry Pi for staking? So one thing to understand about staking, and one of the unique value propositions of Cardano, is that the devices and the infrastructure that stakes does not require for that infrastructure to also hold the spending keys for the value. So let's say that you have a million ADA and you want to delegate that ADA to a stake pool. You can either do your own pool, you can delegate it to Bob's pool, but nowhere in that process does it mean the private keys to spend that million ADA get transferred to that stake pool. You're signing a special transaction to delegate to staking keys. So what that effectively means is even if the stake pool gets compromised, the worst that can happen is the stake pool could behave maliciously for that epoch. But the value that's been delegated to it is never at risk. So I wouldn't recommend actually storing your private keys that contain your money on a stake pool. I think it's a much better idea to put them on either a paper wallet or to put them on a Ledger device or something along those lines, which is very secure, and then initiate a staking transaction and allow Daedalus or the pool to manage that. Okay, what else we got here? Did Don't Call Me P stalk you all summit? No, they're great people. We really enjoyed having them there. The summit was a lot of fun. Let's avoid being listed on Bitfinex. We tried to get listed on Bitfinex back in 2017, and they did not list us. And now they say they are, and I hope everything turns out okay for them. Although I have to admit, the one time that I take the bait and reach out to Bitfinex, Polo mentioned that he's listing ADA, and I sent a message over Twitter saying, hey, if you have any questions, we're here to help. And then like 4 hours later, the Attorney General of New York dropped something about Bitfinex. I was like, oh, come on, you just can't win, guys. That's just not fair. Okay, what else we got here? Give me some good questions, guys. Ada is dead, Charles. Worked for CZ instead. He couldn't afford me. And Ada is far from dead. We're doing great. We've never seen development velocity like this. I'm actually getting a demo of the Haskell code tomorrow, and that's going to be a heck of a lot of fun. And I hope to make that public sometime after it. We're still working out how we're going to make demos public, but it's going to be a fun thing to do. I get flooded with information as a CEO of this company. We have over 200 people. We generate enormous amounts of paperwork and documentation and progress reports and these types of things. And, some of it gets sanitized for public release, but a lot of it doesn't. And one of my mandates post-summit was to be a bit more aggressive about taking things I receive and making those things get into the open domain. So I hope we can get that done. Okay. Hi, Charles. Congrats on Jameson. Will we see the dollar value in Daedalus wallet soon? That's been requested a lot, and we may or may not add it. The problem is that then you'd have to pick an exchange feed, and we don't have like a really consolidated feed of these things. So we could certainly put an aggregate or a weighted feed, but then we have to take a position on it. It's a feature that is not mission critical. That said, I think the wallet that would adopt something like that would be Yoroi. And we've seen it in other wallets like Copay, for example, and it is really nice. So something will come at some point. And frankly, if Yoroi does it, then it's going to kind of force our hand, I think, for a later version. What is the best thing you've eaten in your travels throughout the world? I really like scorpion. Fried scorpion is delicious. I'm very weird like that. Everybody thinks I'm crazy, but you should try it at least once in your life. Chuck, is there a Windows staking option? Yes. You'll be able to delegate from Daedalus to a stake pool, and we will have a command line interface stake pool that works on Windows. In fact, it would be really nice to get it on like a Windows package manager, like Chocolatey or something like that, so you can easily install it and maintain it. But that there will be Windows support for staking, because I'm a Windows user myself, and I think Windows is a great operating system. Get a lot of flack for that. Shelly this year, 100%, no doubt in my mind. I'll eat my own shoe. And I wear boots. Those are hard to eat. Charles, you're the goat, buddy. I'm getting goats. Pygmy goats. I'll take pictures. They'll have sweaters. Has proof of stake actually been implemented anywhere, or are we going to be the first? Proof of stake, like all things, has generations, and we saw multiple generations of proof of stake. For example, the first version that I'm aware of came from, it was Sonny King, and he released something called Peercoin, and Peercoin was a proof of work, proof of stake hybrid. So the proof of work side handled distribution, and it solved a few of the problems that proof of stake needs. And that was in 2011. Then the next major advancement for proof of stake was NXT's proof of stake. And they've been around for quite some time, and a lot of people are pretty happy with them. Ironically, had their ecosystem been better organized, they could have eclipsed probably Ethereum, but they kind of let that one slip. So NXT, had its time, and then the next generation of POSs are coming. Tezos has released something. Tendermint is now out, so Cosmos is running. We obviously have Ouroboros. I think theoretically, from a theory viewpoint, from a mathematics viewpoint, we're ahead of everybody in the entire space, bar none. From an implementation perspective, we're actually pretty close to a production implementation of everything that we need. It's just a question of what target do you have. There's Ouroboros Classic, Ouroboros Praus, Ouroboros Genesis, Ouroboros Thos, Ouroboros Chronos, and so forth. So we have implementations of Classic. We have an implementation of Praus with Genesis rule. We're still looking at what it would take to implement Chronos and Thos, because that would give us a cryptographic beacon and an MTP service from the network itself. But the target for Shelley is Ouroboros Praus with Genesis chain selection rule. And we have working implementation of that, Rust, and a prototype implementation of that in Haskell. So the Rust implementation is likely the one that we're going to go to mainnet with. Noob question, chances of 51% attack on proof of stake, and how would we handle it? So there's a practical way, and there's a social dynamics way. So first off, you have a high market cap. It's really, really hard to stage a 51% attack for an outside attacker. So meaning someone who has no position and wants to acquire a position. The mere act of trying to quickly acquire a position would likely spike the price. And as a consequence, it would become systematically more expensive to attempt to acquire a large position. Then if that person wished to attack the network, we'd have a lot of mitigations for this. The first mitigation would just simply be doing some form of a hard fork or a soft fork to freeze them out. So basically that hostile 51% stake would get locked for some period of time, and then the minority honest stake would basically run the network. But there are other things, like you can make sure that there's checkpoints produced at a relatively reasonable period of time. You can even generate those with trusted hardware, and they can sign it. So there's a lot of things you can do to create a good community consensus of history, even in the event of a 51% attack. And then there are social interventions, and by the way, those are devastating to the individual that they're applied against, but actually have almost no effect on the network. It just makes your ADA more valuable. If an attacker gets frozen for a year because they've launched a 51% attack, it's just hard for 99.999% of the other people continue operating business as normal, but now they're operating business as normal with twice as much ADA. So I just don't see how 51% attacks are super problematic for an actual real deployed network that's fairly decentralized and has the ability to preserve history and has layered security like trusted hardware and other such things. And you have the theory, and we've done a lot of things in theory, and at this point we think we're feature equivalent with Bitcoin. Outside of recovery from dishonest majority, there's some differences there that are incumbent in the protocol, but overall I'm pretty happy with where we're at. You can run a stake pool on x86. In fact, most people probably will. The reason why we chose an ARM device was because of cost. We'd love to see if we can get these devices even working on a Raspberry Pi. So if we could do that, then basically it means your barrier to entry for setting up a stake pool to preserve and run the network is in the cost factor of $50 to $100. Whereas if it's an x86 device, there's like Intel NUC or other such things that you could be in the $400 to $500 price point pretty comfortably. But it's pretty hard to get to that $50 price point on non-ARM ecosystem. What exactly is the difference between Marlowe and Plutus? Plutus is a general purpose programming language, so it's like Haskell, or it's like any standard functional programming language, and it's been built from the ground up specifically to be really useful for writing smart contracts. Marlowe is a domain specific language, so it's Turing incomplete, and it's been built from the ground up specifically for financial contracts. So the difference is that while you can implement financial contracts in Plutus, it's an order of magnitude easier to implement them in Marlowe. In fact, in many cases, you can visually construct them with the Meadow IDE, and you get more theoretical properties about Marlowe that allow you to prove termination of the contract or that the contract is correct. So Marlowe is very amenable to templating, whereas Plutus is more amenable to general purpose programming. So you kind of need both, because the majority of code that's written probably will constitute some form of movement of assets between actors. And so when you're talking about assets, actors, and oracles, that's where Marlowe handles that very well. And then you can embed that within a broader program which handles all the other logic. And then you can embed that with an even broader program that handles all your off-chain code for your client and your server. So it's almost like Russian dolls where they nest within each other. I didn't say pee on my shoe. I said I'll eat my shoe. Why is Donald McIntyre saying that proof of stake is not secure? Is there any validity to that? He's not the only person, and there's going to be a lot of people do that. We've made our arguments very clear. We have tons of proofs about these things. We've taken these proofs through peer review at major academic venues. And at this point, I think it's really more of a religious fight than an academic or an argument fight. If you're going to say that this does not work, then tell us where the proofs are wrong. Tell us what about our assumptions are wrong. Tell us where we made a mistake in our homework. It's almost like you have a kid come to you and say, I've solved your integral, or I've solved your derivative. I've derived this. Here you go. And you look at it and you say, the answer is wrong. You say, okay, well, can you show me what step I screwed up on? And they say, I can't. Well, then how do you know it's wrong? Is there an answer key somewhere around there? Did God give us a book and tell us how to reach consensus in a distributed system? And you go flip the page 216 and it says under proof of stake, it says it doesn't work, it's not secure. I mean, if he has such a book, I'd love to see a copy of it. And in absence of that, the burden of proof is on his shoulders to show us where we're wrong. And somehow our critics never seem to do that. Yeah, we use static code analysis. Your team using any code analysis tools as part of your DevOps to reduce bugs? Yeah, we do linting. We also use a variety of other things like golden tests, fuzzing, and we also use property-based testing. So we can go above and beyond a standard static code analysis, especially given that the code has a particular structure that makes it very amenable to property-based testing. And you don't commonly see that. Why is Cardano still correlated to everyone else? Makes me sad. An existential issue happens to Bitcoin and Tether. We're not on Bitfinex. We don't have any relationship with Bitfinex or Tether. And, these events, they happen from time to time, yet we seem to go down when everyone else goes down. And it just shows you that the markets are where they're at. And I really wish it wasn't the case because a lot of people are working really hard and our community is great. Our community has nothing to do with any of this recent news, yet somehow we suffer because of that, and that's just not fair. It is what it is, and it's just the world we have to live in until we grow so large that we can decouple ourselves, and that's a big priority. Do I need to have a website registered to operate a stake pool? No. In fact, you register your stake pool on blockchain through Daedalus. It's probably a good idea to set up a website, tell people why you're awesome, but the metadata fields alone can allow people to at least get some information about who you are. And it's your job to try to attract people to stake to you, unless you have your own ADA to stake. Do those double doors lead outside? No, they lead outside into my living room. This is my home office. I am 31. Keep them coming. Rapid fire. Charles, what do you think of layer zero network architecture proposals to increase network throughput and scalability? There is a huge deficit of research in our industry for the network stack. And there have been some attempts. For example, Protocol Labs released libp2p. We've been doing quite a bit of research with tech stacks like Rena. We've looked at papers like Poldercast and other such things to have a discussion around a combination of different factors. One is how do you do pub sub in a decentralized system that is efficient and allows you to scale to millions to billions of users and subscriptions? And how do you discover those pub sub feeds? And how do you properly communicate with people? Two, what facts of life do you have to deal with when you're talking about things like UDP, TCP/IP, and just fundamental network connections between people, given existing infrastructure? So the firewalls and the Wi-Fi's, and when people want to use VPNs or run this over Tor, these types of things. And they tend to introduce all kinds of performance situations and operating environments, which make it quite problematic to run a traditional peer-to-peer protocol. Another question is, when you think about gossiping in the system, you say, okay, well, Bob is here and Alice is here, and there's a big graph of nodes that are connected to each other. So how does Bob reach Alice when there's people in between? How does that gossip through, and what is the latency for that? These are things that people have studied for a while. So one of the advantages of a stake pool topology is that you have known actors in the system who have been given special rights as a consequence of the operation of the protocol, which means you can now connect to them in associated relays. And because they happen to be there, it creates a semi-stable network topology. So instead of assuming you're going to have this ever-changing graph that's highly dynamic, you can say, well, I can always route through them. And because they're probably connected to the majority of people, they can reach the majority of people in one or two hops, I can use them as a bridge. And at the very least, a way of discovering subscriptions, a way of discovering other users, and so forth. So the existence of those actors, combined with a lot of modern network protocols, does provide you a way of massively accelerating these types of things. And we've received several proposals from various academics about ways we can leverage these types of network topologies and the proof-of-stake system in general to massively improve network performance. We've also seen people start realizing that the network stack is its own thing from the cryptocurrency. And so as a consequence, you could actually offer a network as a service. So we've seen Amin Gunsir and other people pursue this, either for the mining pools like the Falcon Relay Network to other types of core infrastructure. So it's something we think a lot about. We've done some research. We're going to release a network spec at some point. We actually have several competing network specs within our own organization, and there's almost a holy war between the different teams in terms of their views on how to build these things and what makes sense. And there's a big delta between them. So Shelley will have a pretty standard network stack, but then shortly after launch, we'll start converging to something a bit more bespoke and takes advantages of a lot of the things that we have in our system, which are quite useful. And frankly, if you're going to have layer 2 solutions and you're going to use MPC and these other things, you really do have to have a more resilient, robust network stack. It's an under-researched area. If you look at the entire set of paper volume that's produced compared to consensus protocols and MPC protocols and zero-knowledge protocols, they're all here, and the network guys are down here, and that's really unfortunate. I wish there was more innovation because we would just simply use it. Are patents important? I don't believe so. I don't think patents are relevant anymore. And no, we are not acquiring patents. We don't have a single patent and will never apply for one. It's antithetical to a open ecosystem to say that one company has a monopoly. The meeting with Stephen Wolfram was great. He's a wonderful guy. He is, a really interesting fellow. He's doggedly pursued a vision for over 30 years, and like a dog with a bone, he's probably just not going to give up on it. Mathematica has millions of users. Wolfram Alpha has deals with Amazon, Microsoft, Google. What people don't realize, he's also a big oracle provider for the cryptocurrency space. If you're writing cryptocurrency contracts and you're saying, this will trigger when it's 75 degrees Fahrenheit in this county, well, somebody has to provide that. And Wolfram Alpha is a really good place to get that information. So they're a big gatekeeper, and they're definitely a company to have conversations with. And there are certainly partnerships one can dramatically there's partnerships that people could pursue that could dramatically increase the value of the underlying ecosystem. I'm drinking black coffee. In the morning, I have bulletproof coffee. I feel great. see what else we have here. I do listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, and one of these days I'll try to get on the Joe Rogan podcast once we're a little further along with Cardano. Joe's an interesting guy. He's just first. There is huge value in learning how to have a conversation and listen. So all Joe does is he says, "Who's an interesting person?" and invites that interesting person on the show. And this can be topical to a controversy, like when the James Damore thing came up. This can be or another issue like the Evergreen State College with Weinstein. Or it can be just a generally interesting person, ranging from like a famous comedian to Macaulay Culkin to a famous physicist like Neil deGrasse Tyson was it Matt Green or Sam Harris or something like that. So he invites them on and starts a conversation with them. Some are very gregarious and bombastic and larger than life and just talk and talk and talk like Alex Jones. And other ones like Elon Musk are very reserved and a little cagey, and it's difficult to actually get them to say anything. And what Joe does and why his show is so interesting is he takes the watcher, the listener, on a journey. He has questions that find a way to kind of break into the person and then get them talking, and then you just listen. And you don't know where it's going to go. The thing about interviews that we've been fed over the last 70 years of media, the journalist knows that someone's coming in, and the journalist has a collection of questions they want to ask and a direction they want to go. And this can be a hostile interview, it can be a favorable interview, but in any event, half the interview is already done before the interview even starts. Because you sit down and they say, okay, well, I want to ask him about this, and there's going to be a product launch, and I want to talk to him about that, and there's some controversy here, so we'll make sure to bring it up. Well, what Joe does is the exact opposite. He has no idea, usually, when a guest comes, of what they're going to talk about or where they're going to go. And all he is almost like a boatman navigating a river that he's never been down before. So he knows how to navigate, he knows how to sail the boat, he knows how to make it a fun experience, but no one in the boat knows where the boat's going to go. And if it's going to capsize or if you're going to get somewhere really cool and interesting. And sometimes it's magical, and other times it's not as good as it needs to be, but that's okay. So that's why I think the Joe Rogan Experience is just such a great podcast, and it's something that I hope that most media goes towards, because it's not just Joe Rogan that matters there, and it's also just our lives. When you meet people, talk to people. I've talked to thousands of people over the years, and they all have stories. They all are interesting people. And I find I really enjoy when I just shut up and listen, and I have no idea where we're going or what we're talking about. There are exceptions to that. For example, conferences, everybody wants to sell me something or partner with me or something like that. So you're listening for where's the hook, where's the pitch, what's it going to be. For example, we had somebody come to us and say, "Oh, I love Symphony of Blockchains. It's the best thing ever. You guys are super creative and you're doing great design." And I was like, "Yeah, there's going to be a catch here. There's going to be a catch." And I kept listening and listening, and then, give us $25,000 and we'll get you into consensus. Yeah, okay, there's the catch, right? But when you're in that kind of a format, then it's just like two guys at a bar or something like that. And that's a lot more fun. Yeah, the eye is definitely much healthier. It even hemorrhaged and bled into the eye. Really horrible. Let's see here. What is the probability of a stake pool being chosen? It is proportionate to the amount of ADA staked to the pool. Did IUIUC move to Wyoming or not yet? Go ahead and go to the Secretary of State website of Wyoming and look at Input Output Global. We're there. Do you know who Satoshi Nakamoto is? Satoshi is dead. Move on. Okay, so I've been getting a lot of questions about the UIUC relationship and KEVM and Yella. IOHK retained a one-year contract with runtime verification, and we put a few $1 million into the relationship. And really, we were exploring 3 different areas. And so one area was, is the K framework production ready? And could it be used as a foundational tool for the development of smart contracts and also for the analysis of languages that were used to write smart contracts? For example, K is being used with the formal specification of the ERC20 token, the KEVM, things like that in the ecosystem. The second component was, does semantics-based compilation actually work? So for those who are unaware of semantics-based compilation is basically this idea that you have a language written in K and another language written in K, and then somehow, through the magic of SBC, you're able to take a program that's written in that language and then compile it to basically look like a program written in the other language and then run in that other language. So in other words, if you had the semantics of Java, compile that Java program to then run on Yella, and you wouldn't automate the process. Every single time you update a language, all you have to do is update the semantics of the language once, and then all the programs just work, and you can version all the way down. So for example, when you go from Java 1.8 to 1.12, you just update your Java semantics, and then when you have a 1.8 program, you just pull the 1.8 semantics, and SBC should work the exact same way that it works in 1.12. So this would be a huge advantage, because every time you upgrade the underlying system, you change Yella or change your virtual machine, you just update one set of semantics and all the compilers work with no hand tuning or changes. So you could conceivably end up supporting thousands of languages for your system, and it's basically like universal interoperability. So the third part of the contract was to explore efficiency. So if this is machine-generated code, generally you pay a performance hit for that. And it can be quite significant, 100 to 1,000 times slower than that. And so we spent a few $1 million and a whole year. A lot of papers were written, formalization of KEVM was done, Yella was designed, the KLVM backend was implemented. K was rewritten in a Haskell framework. I think it's over 70,000 lines of code, and a great degree of inquiry was done into semantics-based compilation. Now, the problem is that the work was not concluded. The K rewrite's not quite finished, and it's not at the production parity that it really needs to be parity with the older versions of K, although that'll inevitably get done. The performance delta for the machine-generated code was not where it needed to be. Still about 10 to 100 times slower than handwritten code. And there was no demonstration that SBC could be fully automated. There was things that showed that it had promise, but it wasn't quite where it needed to be yet. So we had to look at our roadmap and say, okay, where do we cut? And there were 2 areas where we decided to scale back ambitions for 2020. One was, let's take a break with KVM and Yella and just get Plutus and Marlowe out throughout 2019, and then survey the situation after the end of 2019, where the industry's at. And the other was RENA. We scaled RENA back a bit. We went with kind of a mini RENA design with our network stack. So what does this mean? It means, well, RV is an open company. Other work is open source. Yella is a complete product. It can be used, and some people have expressed a desire to use it. K is an open source product. It is being used in the Ethereum ecosystem, and they continue to do research along those particular topic lines. But we decided not to renew the contract with RV for 2019. We kind of just took a break and said, well, we'll come back to it in 2020, and we'll take a look at where eWASM's at. We'll take a look at where WASM and WASI is at as an ecosystem and what Ethereum's accomplished. And we'll also take a look at what RV's accomplished over that course of a year and where their investments have taken them. And then we'll make a decision whether to pursue a new contract or if we want to pivot in a different direction for interoperability. And there's a lot of options that exist. They weren't the only vendor in town, but there was a lot of good merit and very attractive stuff there. And we really, really wanted to see if by giving an injection of capital, they'd be able to get it over the finish line. But, as with the case of all things, when you go from a dollar ADA, billions of dollars of project capital available to 5 cent to 10 cent ADA, and much less project capital, you do have to cut around the edges. And this was one area that we decided to cut a little bit. So we'll come back to it in 2020 and see what it looks like. In the meantime, Plutus and Marlowe are actually, we scaled the teams up considerably, and we also scaled the tooling infrastructure around it. And we're getting very close to actually getting going. And it's by the fact that we're writing books about Plutus and publishing papers at PL conferences about Plutus, and we have active tooling like the Plutus Playground and Meadow. That ecosystem is not slowing down. It's speeding up actually, and there's a huge amount of developer interest. So 2019 is all going to be about Plutus, and it's all going to be about that roadmap. And then 2020 is going to be the interoperability year of, how do we bridge the gap for the rest of the stuff. And Yella can certainly be part of that story, as can Kay. And there are other options as well. The world moves on, and there's dozens of great projects in the space. And we bet on one that we thought was really attractive and promising. It just felt to me almost like an NSF project more than a commercial project, where we had spent a lot of time, effort, and money, but there really wasn't a delivery culture set up that could get us to a point where we'd have a 1.0 product there. And so we could invest millions and millions and more dollars chasing that, but I didn't get enough information as a CEO that made me feel comfortable to spend that money. There was something that Steve Jobs once told Johnny Ive, where Steve said, Johnny, you're a very vain guy. And Johnny was a bit perplexed, and he says, what do you mean? And he said that, you never say no to things. You always want to say yes to things. And Johnny says, oh, I say no to lots of things. What do you mean? That's just made up. And he said, no. You only achieve great products when you say no to things you really want to have. You have to make hard choices. And Johnny thought for a minute. He said, yeah, that's actually true. Usually when you say, we'll kill this or kill that, it's something that you already wanted to kill and strongly dislike. It's when you have things in your roadmap that you really love and you think are amazing and awesome that you end up, for the sake of resources or other considerations, pruning. Those are the hard choices that you inevitably have to make in products. And that's the difference between a research product and a kind of a fantasy product or an academic product and an actual product that gets shipped to the consumer that has impact. It's not to say that eventually you can't have these things, but they have to be put in a roadmap and done with iterations. And the big challenge of going from a giant aspirational project like Cardano to Cardano 2020 is about saying, well, there's a delta between what we aspire to do and what can be delivered in a reasonable period of time. Now, the good news is that we've done so much research and we've learned so much about building cryptocurrencies that the delta there is actually not as big as people would think. And that a substantial portion of the things that need to be delivered for Cardano, I think, to be a world financial operating system are conceptually in place. We kind of understand how these things fit together and the dynamics of where to put the protocol. And we have the nice evolutionary factors in the protocol that I think will inevitably get us to close that long tail. But just like self-driving cars or anything else, these things just take time. And there's always this long tail of research that needs to be done to close that last 5%. Sorry, Barbara, you're probably going to have to buy a new device. I think Ledger's moving in the X direction, not the blue. And Andrew K is back, our resident troll asshole. And we're going to remove him. How about that? Bye, Andrew. Cheers. Okay. Let's see what else we got here. Guys, I live on a ranch, and I make best effort to have the best internet. And I have two options where I live. Well, three. One option is CenturyLink, and the best they can give me is 1.5 megabits per second. I have it as a backup, but I don't use it. The second option is 4G, which is through the AT&T network, and I get between 30 to 50 MBS. And sometimes I come through clearly, sometimes I don't. And the third option is satellite, which is about the same through-put, and The difference is the latency is about 700 milliseconds to 1100 milliseconds for the signal. So I opted for 4G. I have no other options where I'm at. And what's almost like the story of Tantalus. I live just a few miles outside of Longmont. If I was in Longmont proper, fastest internet in the entire United States with a municipal ISP. And I'm just tantalizingly close to that, but I'm too far away. So this is the best internet you're going to get. I'll start doing some of these from our office once the carpet's in and we have everything else set up, and the quality would be a bit higher. But outside of that, deal with it. Have you played around with BAT Reward recently launched in Brave? Yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. I do have some BATS token, and I have used Brave a little bit. I still like Chrome, but I might switch over to Brave. I'm not sure. I got to figure out this whole monetization thing. This is not my core business. What else we got here? Will the Ledger wallet be compatible with Daedalus? Eventually, yes. In fact, the route to doing that is through the Rust core, and it's definitely something we're going to get done. But I do absolutely want to have Ledger working with Daedalus. It's very, very important to me, as large holder of ADA, to have a hardware solution alongside multi-sig. So not only do we need to get Ledger to work, we need Ledger to work with a multi-sig solution. And these two things are coming. You can't say Chrome is dated garbage because Chrome, Brave runs on Chrome, as does now Edge, which is modern Internet Explorer, and a litany of other browsers, including Mozilla, are running on their own systems. Okay, what else do we have here? Is Atala open source? Yes. And we'll open the repos at some point. It's all Scala code. Everything we do as a company is open source. Thoughts on proof of sequential time consensus? Simple proofs of sequential work, Bram Cohen's work with the rest of the gang, actually won the best paper award at Eurocrypt. It's peer reviewed, good scientists are behind it, great team. Bram's a great engineer, and I think it's a huge innovation for the space. So I'm very bullish on that, Chia. Charles, why is the last minute Shelly testnet configuration took a month already? Do you understand? Will IOHK dump their ADA? No. Hey, we have Airsoft for the win. Another user put in a timeout. I'm kind of liking this. I wish I had a button for it. Any updates on ETC? As I mentioned last AMA, we're going to submit a proposal to various people there. And my hope is that we'll be able to get a proposal funded and port a lot of great innovations we've come up with to the ETC ecosystem. Should that not be successful, we're going to retire working on the Mantis client. It's all open source. People can do whatever they want with it, but we'll stop active development in ETC. So it's at this point the community's decision if they want IOHK around, and they'll have to open their wallets. I spent $1.5 million of my own money, so I would really, really like to see a commitment from the ETC community. And it opens up an interesting existential question of if they're unwilling to pay core infrastructure providers to keep the ecosystem going, then is that a viable ecosystem? So the question is upon their shoulders. Has Alex actually paid Bob and SL, or is she waiting for Goguen and planning on writing a Marlowe contract? So Marlowe and Plutus will be supported on SL. You'll be able to write SL contracts. So the point of Marlowe is to be a financial contract language. The point of SL is to be a financial contract settlement system. So the point of CL is this idea that there's going to be other computational paradigms, whether that be ephemeral domains like MPC circuits or federated systems like Lightning, or completely other cryptocurrencies that use replicated computation like the EVM. And it makes no sense to try to pull them all into one ledger. It overly complicates the system. It makes it difficult to upgrade it. So you'd like to be able to move value, state, and information from one system to another system. So we developed a two-layer paradigm so we can, on the top layer, take all those solutions and drag them into Cardano quite easily. And then at the base layer, it's all about settling using the best languages possible, which is Marlowe and Plutus. Can you stake from Yoroi? Yoroi probably will have capabilities to delegate. So you can manage your ADA there. There will be a delegation center there, and you'll be able to select a stake pool and delegate to the pool. Yoroi itself will not be able to stake, but you'll be able to manage your delegation to other people through that system. Is IOHK still working consulting with Storm Project? IOHK never worked with the Storm Project. I was a consultant for Storm. They never paid me. I never asked them for anything. They were supposed to give me some Storm. They never got around to it. And I never really did a lot of work with them. I liked the core team. In particular, I really liked one of the people who worked there, Ari Yu. She's no longer there. But I thought Storm was pretty cool because it had a way of bringing people into the cryptocurrency space. But IOHK never had a relationship with them, whereas IOHK does have a relationship with Horizon, as do I. Are you planning on any more Haskell courses in Africa? More likely than not in Uganda. Tarek, if you're having issues with Daedalus, then you're probably not going to be able to fix Daedalus. So I'd recommend migrating to Yoroi and then erasing your installation of Daedalus and just waiting a bit for a major update when we flip out the core code. This is why we created Yoroi with Emergo. They're just a certain group of users. For some reason, they can't get their wallets working. We have a help desk. We're there to help. We've received thousands and thousands and thousands of support tickets. We have FAQs, and we're well more than willing to follow people through and get things working. And for the overwhelming majority of users at this point, Daedalus is working very well for them. But for some group of people, for some reason, Daedalus is not working well for them. So the entire core of the software is being rewritten. And when that occurs, it's another entry point to see if Daedalus will work for you. But in the meantime, I just switched to Yoroi. You have both mobile and Chrome option. And there's a way to import a Daedalus wallet into Yoroi. Product, and it's rapidly iterated. Okay, let's keep going. Yes, Vapor, I am reading your messages. Would Cardano consider making a stable coin the same way MakerDAO creates DAI with CDPs? We have had a lot of conversations about stable coins and what to do there and how to build them. I suppose it's about time to get into the Tether Bitfinex controversy. It's something that got dropped on us just about a few hours ago. So I briefly skimmed through the 23-page document that the Attorney General of New York released, basically outlining the results of an inquiry between the state of New York and the lawyers behind Bitfinex and Tether. So there are two law firms, Morgan Lewis Bacchius and Steptoe Johnson. One's a DC-based firm, that's Steptoe, and the other one is a New York-based firm that are representing the principles behind Bitfinex. And Bitfinex is kind of is a subsidiary of a holding company called iFinex. So basically, Tether, Bitfinex, iFinex, all these things are together and they have the same ownership structure. And they're the 800-pound gorilla in the exchange world. They have billions of dollars of assets. Tether is a hugely important part of our ecosystem. About 80% of all Bitcoin volume, trading volume, is in some way connected to Tether. And for a long time, people have had a lot of questions about whether Tether is solvent, whether Bitfinex is solvent, whether everything is completely legitimate and on board. And some of this has been frustrated by these entities existing in offshore jurisdictions, and some of this has been frustrated by a lack of transparency. For example, none of the big four auditors have published public statements saying there was a full reserve. It seems that banking partners have been a bit skittish, and the banking partners they do have are not large, credible banks. Back in 2007, there were Taiwan banks that were part of Bitfinex. And then after March of 2017, because Wells Fargo wanted to cut that relationship, those banks were threatened to lose their correspondent bank relationships unless they stopped servicing Bitfinex. So then Bitfinex moved to something called Noble Bank International, and that was around September of 2017. And they processed things there, but it was a bit small, not easy to get wires in and out, expensive, and not an ideal banking partner. So somewhere along the way, they chose to give $850 million to a company in Panama called Crypto Capital Group Corp. And this company basically silently acted as a payment processor for them. Apparently, there was no contract between Bitfinex and their principals and this Crypto Capital Corp, which is astounding to me. They have nearly $1 billion deal and no contractual relationship, just an oral relationship. And then Crypto Capital Corp basically stopped processing withdrawals, claiming that their capital had been frozen in Poland, Portugal, and in the United States. So then Bitfinex was left in a difficult position where they had basically almost $1 billion of assets in the hands of a third party who was supposed to service withdrawals, and now they no longer had access to that. So they, according to the Attorney General, did what all companies do when they're faced with tough business decisions, and they happen to have a giant pool of reserve capital. In the case, the reserve backing of Tether, they provided themselves a loan, basically collateralized by equity of their company, around $625 million, if I read the Attorney General's response. And the loan terms were reasonable, basically like 6.5% interest or something like that, and a 3-year term. So basically, Tether went from being 100% asset-backed, or so Bitfinex claims, to now partially backed by U.S. dollars, and then the remaining is backed by equity and Bitfinex. The challenge here is that all these entities are related to each other. Tether, Bitfinex, iFinex, and there's apparently just two principals there that control the structure. And there's not a lot of transparency or oversight. And unfortunately for Bitfinex, it turns out that they have serviced customers in the state of New York, which has actually dragged their business nexus into the state of New York and given New York regulators a great degree of power and control over Bitfinex's operations as an MSB. So this is a difficult thing for our industry. Tether is a major linchpin in a lot of trading and liquidity. Traders rely upon it being solvent and existing and stable. And Bitfinex is a major exchange in our entire industry. And the challenge is that if Bitfinex was to collapse, and a lot of retail investors could end up being hurt. In fact, in the document that I read from the Attorney General, they actually wanted to enjoin normal operations for Bitfinex. They wanted to continue trading of legitimate assets in Tether because it specifically did not want to disrupt retail investors. So this is just a natural consequence of our industry being very young. When you go from unregulated to pseudo-regulated to offshore jurisdictions, you're bound to have situations where perhaps not the best controls are put into place, And unfortunately, the legacy banking world doesn't seem to really want to work well with us. And as a consequence, at a whim of a hat, an entity like Wells Fargo can just mandate, well, you're not going to be able to process payments anymore. And then it forces an entity to have to scramble and move billions of dollars to other entities in increasingly more difficult jurisdictions. And all the while, you have a lot of competitors, and they're eating your lunch. So you have to maintain a break. Hope that everything gets cleaned up and things end up for the best for everybody. And like you guys, I have no information beyond what's been publicly released. Bitfinex is one of the few exchanges UIUC has almost no relationship with and no conversations with. Back in 2017, they expressed an interest in listing ADA, and they wanted quite a large sum of money to do that. And we don't play that game. And for 2 years, no listing occurred. And recently, CTO mentioned that they are planning on doing a listing, in which case we said, well, look, we're always here for technical support. If you have any questions about the APIs, the clients, these types of things, we're quite happy to provide that type of assistance as we do all of our exchange partners. But anyway, it's a difficult situation, and I'm hope for the best that everything works its way out and everybody's okay. Okay, what else? How was CCR at the summit? It was great. They got this new guitarist who's from Sundance, Wyoming. There's like 300 people in that county, and he can play, man. He's like Fogerty. He's really, really good. They're a great band. They rocked like crazy. We got within 5 feet of them while they were rocking. I still have some hearing loss from that, and that's a good way to go deaf. So I was quite fun with that. Come on, guys, give me some good questions. We're almost done. Charles, what are your thoughts on negative interest rates from banks? And they're discussing this to be implemented. Guys, this is one of the reasons why cryptocurrencies need to exist. There will be a time in many developed nations throughout the world that you will have money in a bank and you will be charged a fee to store money in that bank. Just think of this business model. You give a financial institution your money, they have possession of it and are allowed to take. So it's like saying, I'm going to give you my car and I'm going to let you operate that car with Uber. Okay, so you do that, and instead of them paying you for having your money, you now have to pay them. So under the Uber analogy, not only do I have to give you my car, I have to pay you to take my car so then you can go on and make money from it. At what point do we take a step back and say the entire system is a fraud? And this entire system is really in a disgusting state. I'm sorry, if you live in a system where you are giving your property to somebody and you have to pay them to hold it like it's radioactive waste, when they're able to monetize that, then that system is fundamentally against you, the consumer. So what's going to happen? Within the next 10 years, stable coins will be a resolved business, one way or another, and they will not require the legacy banking system to work. Somebody's going to figure it out. It's going to emergently come out of our industry, either through the central banks, like what BIT is doing with the ECCB, or through algo coins, which become sufficiently liquid and stable and have enough depth that they reasonably hold their value within a delta. But something's going to happen where stable these coins are going to exist. And at that point, if negative interest rates come, you will see a gargantuan exodus of legacy money into the crypto space. Because what choice do I have? If I have $1 million in the bank and they're charging me 5% to hold it in there, of course I'm going to convert it into a stable coin. That would be just stupid not to have negative carry on liquid assets. So I think that, this whole talk at the G20 and with the World Bank and the BIS and these other guys about the concept of embracing these insane policies is just going to drive further crypto adoption. And whether it happens in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, it will come, and it's going to make crypto big. So yeah, these Bitfinex things are tough, and the market's tough, but the fundamentals are with us. You no longer need a bank to be your payment system. You no longer need a custodian to hold your assets. This is being built real time by great engineers. Some at my company, some at other companies. Somebody's going to win, and a stablecoin will come, and that stablecoin's going to be awesome. And at that point, you'd be out of your damn mind to charge a negative interest rate. And also, why do you need FDIC insurance? Because you're worried about the bank becoming insolvent. You're worried that a bank run will happen or some entity will occur and the bank goes out of business because they're fractional reserve. What if their loan portfolio defaults, in which case they no longer have enough money to pay you? So the government comes in and says, we're going to insure those deposits. But if you have a full reserve, you have all the money, you possess that money yourself, you don't need insurance because it's a full reserve. You're like, what? Insuring against, not you somehow losing your full reserve? There's no creditor you've given the money out to. So that whole system is unnecessary. All right, come on, guys, give me some interesting questions. And it's so funny. This whole industry exists because of the malfeasance of the banking industry, and we just keep getting bigger and more prominent, smarter, keep getting better partners, and some of the smaller governments are basically like a lot of them to create a movement. It's coming. It is definitely coming. Hey, oh, blockchain identity. Yeah, let's talk about that. That's a good question. So, uh, the identity management side of our industry is a very fertile and rich space. And when you're innovating, you have to ask how much do we want to build within our project and how much do we want to borrow from people who are already innovating in our space. For example, we didn't invent UTXO. We didn't invent a lot of ways that ledgers are structured or the Merkle tree. All these things existed before, and they're fundamentally good ideas. So we said, let's take them and let's just refine them, make them better, and make them useful for us instead of trying to create a completely new accounting system or a completely new authenticated data structure or other such things. Identity is much the same way. So there's really a few different parts of identity. One part is how do I identify you, assuming that the data, what root of trust, all of these things already exist. So you already have some system of attesting who people are. You already have a PKI. I need to find you, and I need to actually look up the information about you. So there's a standard for that, and that's called the DID standard. It's from the W3C. And basically, it stands for a decentralized identifier, DID. And it's basically URM. It's a 3-part code. The last part is the lookup. Now, the DID is attached to what's called the DID document. And the document has all these facts and claims about the person, and it's self-authenticating. So within the DID are the keys, the cryptographic credentials you need to verify that document's legitimate. Now, the second part of this is the actual root of trust of your system. How do you establish a namespace and say, this code belongs to this person, this code belongs to this person, and how do you establish who is who? Like the authenticators. So it's the bootstrap problem. Now, you can do this on a personal basis. For example, Web of Trust with PGP, I would have a PGP key, you'd have a PGP key, we'd meet each other at a club or a conference or something like that. I'd look at your PGP key and I'd look at your passport or something and say, yeah, I think this is reasonable, and I would sign it. And then eventually you get a lot of weight in that system. So I'd have hundreds of signatures, and I'm kind of a public figure. So people say, all right, Charles is now kind of like a certificate authority. He's kind of a root of trust. So any signature coming from Charles probably has a lot of weight. So if Charles says you're Bob, then I think he probably did his homework. And it's a kind of a semi-decentralized system that relies on reader documents and other things to establish a web of trust. You also can build federated systems. For example, the way the web works with certificate authorities. You have many different ones, and you have roots underneath them, and you say, okay, I trust this CA, my browser trusts it, and that's why my web address appears green with a little lock. And then you also can have a centralized system, like a corporate registry. For example, Microsoft can be a root of trust for its own employees. So Microsoft can have a master key, and when you join Microsoft, they sign your key, and now you have a legitimate Microsoft key. Okay, so you have an options there. You have a decentralized system for root of trust, a federated system for root of trust, or a centralized system for root of trust. Then there are two things you think about within that namespace. One is facts, and the other is opinions. So facts are things like Charles Hoskinson is 31. Charles Hoskinson was born in Hawaii. They're either true or false. And these are statements. Now, you can get into all kinds of things of what is the burden of evidence to establish that a fact is true. And that's an interesting conversation. It does generally require some sort of root of trust behind certain things, like a birth certificate, for example, or a social security number, or some sort of a trusted attester. For example, if you assert you have a diploma or a license, like you say you're a doctor, well, it's pretty easy to verify that. At least in the United States, medical professionals' credentials are attached to a state. So when I say my father's a doctor, people can actually look him up and see he has a medical license to Colorado, state of Wyoming. And those are publicly known credentials. So if you assert you have something, there's usually a governing body that controls that, and then they're in charge of verifying those facts. So that's the fact component of identity. Now, the opinion component is qualitative. So it's one thing to say Mark Hoskinson's a doctor. It's another thing to say he's a good doctor. Okay, that's a totally different statement because it's subjective. When you say he's a good doctor, it's not the global you, it's not the global we, it's a particular person. Like Alice says he's a good doctor. Bob says he's a good doctor. So the first question you ask is, well, who the hell is Alice or Bob to know that? How do we know they're credible people? How do we know they actually have a real opinion? Like, it would be one thing if Alice lives in the same town and is has been a patient for 5 years of that physician, and there's evidence that Alice's life was saved as a result of that physician. It's another thing entirely if Alice has never met the person and lives in a completely different country and is just some random person over the internet. Now, it's the same qualitative claim. This person is a good doctor, but there's a huge amount of context that's connected to the person making the claim. So opinions about people are referential. So any identity management system actually has to be able to cover all three of these particular domains. It has to be able to cover first the ability to find identities and store information, whether that be opinions or facts about them. It has to have some sort of opinion on root of trust, whether that be centralized, federated, or decentralized. And then it has to be able to reconcile facts and opinions and allow both of these things to exist. Furthermore, you have to have the ability to revoke identities within the system. In fact, oftentimes when you talk to cryptographers, they say, look, the single most important thing in any identity management system is the ability to revoke credentials, because therein lies the weakest point in the system and the most difficult point of the system to manage without centralized control, especially in a decentralized system. So there's been a lot of innovation in our space. There's this concept you can look up called self-sovereign identities. There's a lot of books like From Bitcoin to Burning Man that actually talk about this. There's something called the Identity Foundation. So if you go to identity.foundation, you can actually see all the members there, and there's a big consortium, and there's actually dedicated projects that do nothing but this. For example, Hyperledger Indy, INDY, is an identity ledger specifically for handling identities. There's another one called the Sovereign Foundation, which is focused on this. So it's a very well-researched area. I'd say of all the three areas, the first one has been solved. There's a standard now from the W3C for DID. It's a very good standard. It's SSI compliant. It's just a good idea. It's the URL and the website for identity. UIUC will support that in its product lines. It's coming into Atala. It's coming into Cardano. The DID idea is fundamentally sound. The root of trust idea, you can store the DID documents. You can store the DID identifiers. You can store information about the root of trust, so some pre-shared keys, some sort of foundational stuff in a blockchain structure. For example, UIUC will have some identity. We'll probably put that into the Cardano blockchain, and our software will be aware that that's an UIUC credential, almost like a certificate root authority. So for our software, we can doubly sign that and have builds that people know are legitimate. It's a really good place to put these types of credentials. But it is an open question of, well, moving beyond that, what's the best way of managing that? And where do you get your foundational injections of trust, bootstrapping trust to get the system where it needs to go? And that's still very much an open question. Then facts are easy. There's all kinds of people that deal in facts, and it's just loading the system up with those fact brokers, and then they make people make claims, and then there's verification of those claims, auditing of those claims. Opinions are difficult because they're referential, and that's more of a communal thing. And what generally ends up happening is emergently a social network will have certain truths over the long run float to the top. Wikipedia is an example of that. If you look at highly controversial people like Obama or Trump, the Wikipedia articles for Obama and Trump actually tend to be very reliable, and they tend to be very factual. And if you look at the discussion pages and the amount of editing that's done, it's always a war, but it's a war with a lot of people on all sides working, and as a consequence, it tends to converge to the minimum viable set of collections of statements you can make about the person, and you get a pretty good sense of what's going on. Whereas other articles which have less participation and feedback tend to be less reliable. For example, when you're talking about stubs or very boutique topics or biographies of smaller people, they tend to just basically either be written by the person themselves or by their fans, so they get wildly biased. And that information you're getting, those qualitative assessments, can either be heavily negative or heavily positive, but they don't tend to converge to something that's good. So that's another open problem in an identity management system. Now, from our part at Cardano, one of the things we will do is presuppose that there exists a root of trust, which does happen. Estonia exists. You have driver's licenses, you have passports, these things exist. And then basically allow DID embedding within transactions. So how that works is that you have Alice and Bob. And what happens is that Alice is going to send a transaction to Bob. And so what she'll do is she'll embed in the metadata associated with the transaction, publicly connected to the transaction, or to encrypt them with some form of information, maybe the private key of the sending key, and maybe encrypt it with, her public key or something, and then encrypt it with Bob's public key. So only Alice and Bob can decrypt the metadata, and because they possess those particular private keys, they're able to decrypt it, but no one else can. So you can create an obfuscated DID. So what does it mean? It means that if an auditor comes in, Alice can then show that the transaction wasn't connected to her, and connect it to Bob. These two things were there. And that basically can turn that information over, and it's time-stamped and auditable and non-reputable, but it's not publicly available. So we'll support that for metadata embedding, and there's all kinds of things you can do. Now, one really, really, really cool idea that's associated with this is this concept of contingent settlement. I mentioned in my last AMA, but I'll mention it again because it's something that I really, really, really love, and that's basically this concept of I have to get permission from the person I'm sending funds to send funds to them. This is a big problem with Bitcoin. You have Alice and Bob. Bob has an address. Alice figures it out one way or another. Maybe it's on a website. Maybe it's an exchange address. Who knows? And Alice just pushes value to Bob. It's a push system. So Bob receives it. Well, if Bob is a regulated business, or if Bob is some sort of organization that has a business policy behind use of funds and receiving of funds, I can make Bob a criminal. All I have to do is just go give someone in North Korea a very small amount of Bitcoin and say, okay, go ahead and send this to Bob's address. And then suddenly they've now received funds from an OFAC listed jurisdiction. And so that's a real problematic for Bob. And also there's all kinds of commercial cycles where you want some sort of assurances from the person you're sending funds to that that person is adhering to a certain policy. For example, let's say you run an exchange. You're running Charles Exchange, and then one of the customers is going to withdraw some funds, 50 Bitcoin from Charles Exchange. That's a big transaction. It's a lot of money. So they give you an address, and they said, here's my address. I'd like you to withdraw to that. Well, I would love to get some verification that you own that address. Remember, we're talking about exchange, so you've already gone through KYC and AML. There is no notion of privacy here. I know who you are. I know who your account belongs to. I'm reporting that information to a regulator. Let's not pretend that that's not happening. That's a regulated business. So this is for your benefit as a consumer. I would like to know that before I push that 50 Bitcoin to the address you provided me, that a man-in-the-middle attack didn't happen and someone switched the address, and that I get some extra assurances that your account has not been compromised. How? Let's say you have a decentralized identifier. Well, what I can say is, I'm going to require you to embed your DID into the transaction and sign it before the transaction settles. So what does it mean? It means that the only person who could do that is the person who has the corresponding private key to the DID. So in other words, Bob. So I'm not going to send any transaction. It won't settle. I'll create a pending transaction with this contingent requirement. And the only way it can settle is if the person who owns that address signs it with the particular identifier that I have registered on file. So what does it mean? It means that your account has been compromised and also your identity has been compromised. And these are two separate things. I don't have anything about your identity. I just know what it is, but I don't have your private keys for that. So even if your account gets compromised, it doesn't correlate to your identity is also going to be compromised. So it gives you added assurance. Now, what does it mean for the auditor? I now have proof that I sent it to you, non-reputable digital proof, because there's a signature connected to it. So the customer can't come back to me, the exchange, and say, oh, you were compromised and you paid the wrong person. I'll say, no. I have non-reputable proof that your identity is connected to this transaction. And the only reason it executed is because you consented and signed it. So you can think of this for donation deeds. You can think of this for exchange withdrawals that I just mentioned. You can think of this for trade finance deals. You can think of it for supply chain deals where it doesn't move from one stage of the supply chain to the next stage until the warehouse confirms what the delivering person is saying. There's all kinds of things in life that require contingent settlement. And if you have the ability to embed information like metadata into that transaction, in particular the identity, that's a big deal. And it's something that's fundamentally absent from Bitcoin. So if any Bitcoin maximalist says Bitcoin's perfect, it's complete, it has no problems, it's going to take over the entire world, then ask them how they solve the contingent settlement situation. And they'll look at you with a blank face, and they won't even know what the hell you're talking about. It just shows you they're not really thinking about how real-life commerce works. The new horse is great. It's a rescue horse. Paid $500 to adopt it. Yeah, I had a friend who did dressage, and she jumped horses with Georgina Bloomberg and all these other people, and those dressage horses, some of them were over $1 million. $1 million for a horse, I can't understand it. I paid $500 for my horse, and I was like, man, that's a fair price. Horses are expensive. They develop all kinds of weird health problems, and you always have to have a vet doing something. But you love them. They're great pets. Yes, Cardano is implementing contingent settlement, 100%. It's a business requirement, and one of the reasons it's taking a little bit of time to get Goguen and Shelley where they want to go are these next generation features that we want to do, and we just have to make sure that they work properly because we're the first people to really do this. You know, when you want to innovate, you have to pay an innovation price. That's okay. We mostly paid it. By the way, another cool thing about the DID is that you own that. The data associated with it, the control over that, that's a private public key pair, and it's an infrastructure where those files exist on a blockchain, encrypted or otherwise. And so as a consequence, you have unrestricted access to it, and people can't shut you out. Governments can revoke documents like passports or driver's licenses. It's real hard to revoke a debt. So you can flee a country and you can still prove all kinds of facts about yourself and still interact and do business with people, even if you had to leave Syria or something like that. That's a very powerful thing. Do you think Elizabeth Holmes should go to jail? You know, there is a great book called Bad Blood, and there's some documentaries that are on market, and there's also a Hollywood movie coming out about Elizabeth Holmes, CEO of Theranos. So, for people who are unaware, Elizabeth Holmes was the CEO of a company called Theranos, and Theranos asserted that they had this magic technology, a little box that you basically could use with a single drop of blood, and that would tell you all these things about your blood. You know, tell you diseases you have, or if you have diabetes or AIDS or something. You'd be able to verify all these things, or HIV, I should say, from this black box. Now, this would be a major revolution because normally you'd have to take vials and vials of blood and run it through expensive lab equipment, and there's a multi-day turnaround. And be able to take a finger prick would functionally mean that you could sell these to people to have in their homes, or Walgreens could have them. And basically, as part of your daily shopping, you just go over the machine, pull out a tab, click, put it in, and boom, you get a report emailed to you securely, and you'd be able to see if you're healthy or not, and if you have some problems or not. Now, if that was real, it would be a revolution in medicine, and really would be like on par with the invention of antibiotics. Yeah, especially given that you could add more capabilities. The consumerization of this would actually turn all of these tests into a big data problem, and then suddenly you'd have an overwhelming amount of information to use. And we could also eventually start talking about personalized medicine, where you could start understanding basically what to give people based upon their genome and their labs, instead of just average dosaging. It's like the power of these types of things so great. So it wasn't a coincidence that this persuasive person was able to get a lot of people in Silicon Valley to invest enormous sums of money in her, about $900 million. And she had a very good board of directors. She had Henry Kissinger and General Mattis and all these other people, like big, real people. But then when you peel the surface layer, the surface story of this brilliant female entrepreneur who's a Stanford dropout, who basically is trying to make herself the next Steve Jobs. She even wears the black turtlenecks and talks with a artificially deep voice and has all these strange mannerisms and tried to be as rude as Steve Jobs. When you start peeling those layers back, foundation the field really does embrace the scientific method and peer review, and really does have a long cycle of innovation. It takes a long time to get FDA approval on devices and medicine. there weren't really any papers or other things coming out of Theranos that would indicate that they'd actually solved the problems. Like if you contrast Theranos to IOHK, we have a long publication record. If a government agency was to start investigating our company and say, well, you said this and this and this, provide the documentation for these claims, we'd have thousands of pages of documents, and actually a lot of them are even sitting in the public domain, especially the scientific research. So you just do a data dump and you say, here you go, have fun reading all this math. And then they have to go find some cryptographers to read it and then say, well, what's fact and what's fiction? Whereas Theranos, there was nothing behind the curtain. There was no science behind that. There was no grand engineering behind that would provide ample evidence that the claims that Elizabeth was making to Walgreens, to the military, to other actors were real. And in many cases, there's actually evidence to the contrary. And there was, when investigative journalists started tearing the company apart, a whole bunch of whistleblowers and other people who were shouting as loudly as they could, this company is a scam. These things are not real. The competitors like LabCorp and others who've been in this field for a very long time, very, very good scientists behind them, lots of pathologists, lots of pharmacists, lots of PhDs. They had pretty sophisticated understanding what you can and can't do with the state of the art of lab equipment. We're saying there's just no way that Theranos has what they claim they have, unless Elizabeth is the next Einstein or something like that. So despite the fact that there were a huge amount of red flags, despite the fact there were whistleblowing employees, despite the fact that you don't see this type of innovation in this type of industry the way it is, pharmaceuticals and biotech is a long arc endeavor. You see victories in every decade. You don't see victories every month like we do with software. It was mostly ignored by Silicon Valley. So the real story about Theranos is not that they were a scam and that she made it all up, and she probably will go to jail. The real story there is how could so many intelligent people in Silicon Valley who are billionaires and paid to be geniuses get it wrong? How could they lack basic due diligence? When you say you have a magic box that does something, well, before I would invest in that, I'd say, give me the magic box. I'm going to give you 10 random samples. I'm not going to tell you anything about them. And I'm going to see if the magic box gets it right. And I want the magic box in my office, not your office in your controlled environment. I want it in my office. And if the person says, no, you can only do it at my facility, and all your competitors want to invest in me, I say, great, you take their money and burn it to the ground. All the time, people come to me with this state-of-the-art great technology, brand new way to do proof of stake, brand new way to do scalability, new ZK snark thing, new privacy thing, and I say, great, show me the papers you've written. And a lot of cases, they don't have one, or they say, I can't show it to you because I don't want you to steal it. And I say, well, that's fine. Take it to somebody else. EOS has a lot of money. Maybe they'll like it, but I'm not interested because I have basic principles behind the way I've done business. And I got these principles from being in business for a while and from learning from people who've been in business a lot longer than me, like Don Valentine and all these others who on YouTube basically tell you how to vet a company. And the same way Sequoia did it in the 70s. I mean, it's not rocket science. These VC guys write books. So they have a model, yet somehow Theranos was exempt from that model. And they were allowed to say things, do things, and act in a way that no other company in Silicon Valley is really allowed to do, especially when we're talking about the topic of human health. And so it was a great failure. And I think the real story is, how will Silicon Valley regain its credibility on the back of this? It's perfectly fine to have a bit of puffery when you're talking about social networks and cell phone applications and these customer acquisition plays. At the end of the day, if it fails, you've lost some rich people's money, and it was some code that didn't work the way you thought it was. It's not okay to have puffery when you're talking about medicine or biotechnology, because when you lie, then people die. Money can be replaced. People take risks. In some cases, it's just like gambling for them. When people die, they can't be replaced. In Theranos, basically gambled on that side of the spectrum, betting that one day they would hire the right scientists and they'd be able to catch up that grandiosity gap. The lies would eventually become true, and who cares because now it works. Maybe that works in software, but shares held is not a really interesting story. And I'd highly encourage people to read Bad Blood, great book. and highly encourage people to follow the story and just ask basic due diligence questions. Whenever anybody comes to you with a business idea or a project idea, the story can never be too good to be true. You just ask for basic things. Like if I say my thing does X, your first question should be, what test can I construct to independently verify that your thing does X? If someone says their cryptocurrency can do 500,000 transactions per second, the first thing you should ask for is, what independent third party has verified that claim? And they'll say, oh, I don't need to do that, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, I'm sure you have a great system, but it's not for me. And I love this guy, ADA. He's quoting the price of ADA. Tether and Bitfinex are under trouble, and you think that somehow there's a moral failing with ADA, and that's why the price is going down. Dude, the market is not healthy right now. It's not going to be healthy for a little while. Major piece of infrastructure is screwed up. I could cure cancer right now. We could announce the Shelly shipment tomorrow. I could announce this AMA Shelly shipment. The price won't go up. It's Bitfinex. We're going to live that game. It's just amazing. People trade. If you look at the history of cryptocurrencies, let's talk about money for a little bit. I've been in the cryptocurrency space since 2011. In my experience, and also looking at trading data and talking to people who do this for a living, more often than not, this industry experiences massive surges. So if you look at 365 days of trading, you're going to have a lot of this, some of this, where it trends down for a bit, and some of this where it trends up for a bit and it goes down. And then suddenly, spikes right up. 3-day period, you double your price or something like that. Happens a lot. And why it happens, God only knows. It's not correlated to progress or news. Like when Bitcoin shot up from $600 to $20,000, or let's say 10,000 to 20,000. I remember I was at Consensus when it hit 10,000. There was Gabe Abed put on a 10K party for Bitcoin, and it was, wow, this is crazy. And just a few months later went to 20K. It took 8 years to get to 10K and only 2 months to get to 20K. Now, what was the fundamentals behind it? There's no fundamentals behind that, because these are not real markets. Use some common sense. They're manipulated markets. The liquidity is not real. A lot of the trading is not real. The prices go up and down. They're on unregulated or pseudo-regulated exchanges. There's lots of insider trading happening. It's not real. Okay? It's real when there's millions of people using it, millions of people with natural demand behind it. Let's say I create a token and you can use that token to pay for your water and your electricity. And let's say it's mandated that you have to use that token to pay for your water and electricity. And there's millions of people doing that. That's real demand. So there's going to be lots of people buying the token, not because they want it, because they have to use it to do something with it. And then there's going to be people on the other side. And because they know there's real demand, a real economy forms, and people say, well, I can pay for my water and my power with this, so I'll accept the token for products and services. And that's a real circular economy. Do we have that with cryptocurrencies? No, we don't have that with cryptocurrencies. So these prices don't exist. It's casino land. Get it through your heads. It's not real. And it's just like everybody wants something for nothing. Everybody wants to get rich. It's nothing new. It's why people play the lottery. I'm here to change the world. And a lot of people who have bought ADA or part of our ecosystem are here to change the world too. And they care a lot about this. There's some people have tackled themselves on thinking that somehow ADA is just going to go to the moon. If we go to the moon, it's because we changed something. We made something fundamentally better. If you look at Tesla, whatever grievances people have about that company, Tesla is forcing an industry-wide conversation about battery-powered transportation, the mass manufacturing of batteries, the mass charging of batteries, a parallel infrastructure to this monopoly the oil companies have. And they're forcing a global conversation about fundamentally improving the technology in cars. It's just a miracle what they've done with self-driving vehicles. And as a consequence, my Cadillac now drives itself on the highway with Super Cruise. That would have never happened had Tesla not existed. So there's value across the whole board. I just bought a lawnmower for my ranch. It's a Ryobi lawnmower. It's battery powered. I could drive it for 3 hours cutting grass with one charge. That would have never occurred had Tesla not done what they've done and brought these innovations to the industry. That's real value, synergistic value to everybody, and real value being produced for the customer flows. Our industry has a moral duty to provide this to people, and if we can't do it, it's all a scam. So if all you care about is the price, you have to take a step back and say, who is buying this from you? How will you be able to sell? Let's say your asset goes from $1 to $1 million. Who the hell's on the other side of that deal buying your stuff up? Where do they get their money from? Where's the money coming from? Think it through. Think it through. Take a step back and think it through. Just the same questions for due diligence on that magic black box that can do all these things. What tests would you invent to verify if that thing exists? When you're thinking about a trade, why is somebody buying this? And I had this issue with Steam. I remember when Steam came out. I wrote some Steam articles, and every article I was writing, I was making $5,000 an article on average. It blew my mind. I was like, well, why are people buying this token? This makes no sense. So I asked Ned and the other guys behind Steam, where does the demand come from? And they said speculation. So I said, let me get this straight. Inflation creates something to incentivize the creation of content. And I get these tokens, and I have no incentive to hold these tokens. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sell them. And the counterparty buying them is only buying them because they think it might be worth more money. That's not a sustainable system. The value is going to leak out. Now, if the tokens were connected to something real, like you have advertising, and the only way you can advertise in the system is by buying the token, then that's at least a closed economy. Because you say, okay, I have these content providers that have millions of viewers and listeners and readers, and the only way I'm going to get my ads to them is the use of this token. Google, Facebook, these companies are advertising Goliath, and they make billions and billions and billions of dollars from that. So it's perfectly plausible to say that somebody would be willing to spend $50,000 or $100,000 on tokens to get an ad in Joe Rogan's podcast, for example. So that's a closed circular economy. Then there's at least natural demand for the token. So if I have it, there's a reason why somebody would want it from me, and there's a market there, and if it's worth X, it's worth X. Okay. But when it's speculation, you're basically saying useful idiot. That's what you're saying, that the person buying it from me is the greater idiot than me selling. Is that how you want to make millions of dollars? Is that how you want to make your life savings, to say that you dupe somebody else? I mean, how are you any better than BitConnect at that point? Think it through. And yes, I've met Elon Musk. He used to come to my alma mater all the time. I met his brother, too, Kimball, who runs a restaurant called The Kitchen. Nice guy. And I didn't say buy a Tesla. I just said that Tesla produces great things. I could have bought a Tesla. I chose to buy a Cadillac. And the CT6 is a phenomenal car. Absolutely amazing. Highly recommend. The 2019 CT6 is the best sedan ever made. Makes Mercedes-Benz and BMW look like garbage. Hello, Fort Collins. Remember, the Rams always lose to the Buffaloes. It's a little joke. Okay, let's talk about toxic batteries. You know, batteries can be recycled, and battery technology is improving. And there's a supply chain that you can create where eventually you can have a closed system where when the batteries go bad, they go to special facilities, they get refurbished, recycled, and then they become new batteries. And for the most part, you don't need to mine any more lithium to get there. And eventually we'll have graphene batteries or other things that are much more environmentally friendly than lithium-ion batteries. Whereas the fossil fuel industry, when you extract oil, I mean, that's the extraction of a natural resource. The only way to continue providing that power is to continue extracting. So I don't think there's a moral equivalence between batteries and also cars. The other thing is, this is not a car problem. There's a synergistic connection to cell phones. There are billions of cell phones and tablets produced every year globally, and every single one of them has a battery in it. So there's a global collective commons problem of dealing with that waste. Whether no Teslas were made, we still have billions of batteries sitting in our landfills if we do nothing about it. So there is going to happen in the next 10, 20 years, a closed system to get these batteries to be more ecologically friendly and recycled. By the way, everybody wants a cell phone that lasts 24 hours or 48 hours or a week. Everybody wants their cell phone to charge in 15 minutes. Everybody wants their cell phone battery to last 10 years. So that they don't have to deal with what they're dealing with today. The very same research going into that for hundreds of billions of dollars of consumer devices is synergistically available to Tesla for cars. So if you're looking at the trends, it's almost like vacuum tubes versus transistors, where when the transistor first came out, compared to the vacuum tube, it was no comparison. Vacuum tube, vastly superior technology, more reliable, and it could just do more. But then people realize the trend that the transistor is going to get a whole lot better, scale a whole lot faster. And the vacuum tube had kind of peaked as a technology. And this is where we're at with battery powered cars. My lawnmower I bought doesn't have an engine, doesn't need spark plugs, doesn't need oil changes. It's a much simpler system, and it's a lot quieter. And I get a better cutting experience today. And I just plug it into the wall, a 120 volt outlet, and charges overnight. And I could mow again tomorrow if I want. So, these things look good. Well, thank you, Jeremy F. General Motors makes great cars, and I used to be a Ford man. I wanted to buy a Lincoln. They were just terrible compared to the Cadillacs. And how much Cardano have you sold for fiat thus far? None. There's another thing the space doesn't understand. Everybody says, "Oh, Charles's lifestyle is financed by ADA." No, it's financed by Bitcoin, guys. I've been in space a long time. Sold no ADA. It's verifiable, provably so. We published. If you Google UIUC ADA Holdings, you'll see a blog post. We publicly announced our address. You can go to a blockchain explorer, see 0 ADAs moved. Never sold any ADA. So why do people keep asking? Because people spread lies and rumors, and they say, "Oh, well, the only reason they're doing what they're doing is they're selling their ADA." Okay, what else we got here? And natural gas is pretty cool. You can make all these things. There's actually a company called Carbon Engineering that allows you to suck CO2 out of the air and convert it into oil if you wanted to do it. Think about that. You could literally put a device and suck CO2 out and make oil from it if you're willing to put in enough energy to do it. Don't have a fossil fuel problem. It's just a distribution problem. Battery powered cars are basically like cryptocurrencies. They put you in control. You don't have to negotiate with an oil company. You don't have to go to a gas station. You don't have to rely on a supply chain. If there's a hurricane or a flood or if there's a blizzard, you don't have to worry, where am I going to get my fuel from? If you have the ability to generate your own electricity, you then have the ability to operate your vehicles. You're getting off the grid. You're becoming independent. Makes sense to me. Fuel cells make a lot of sense too. But actually, the oil companies really, really, really like fuel cells because it has the same supply chain dynamics as oil currently does. So let's say we go to a hydrogen economy. We have the fuel cell that sits in your car. You need to pump hydrogen in the car. Where do you get it from? The gas pump. So you have the diesel pump, the gasoline pump, the hydrogen pump. Where's the hydrogen come from? They make it from methane. So basically, just take the stuff they're already doing and they do it a little differently. And they put it into trucks just like they put gasoline. They put it in the gas station just like with gasoline. It has the same consumer experience. That's why a lot of oil companies put a lot of money in R&D and fuel cells and own a huge patent portfolio over these things. And they were just waiting for people to get tired of oil, flip a switch, and suddenly we're in the hydrogen economy and water is coming out of your tailpipe, so everybody feels ecologically friendly. but it's the oil company who's still in control, not you. Now, you can make hydrogen at home, but along that same token, you can make biofuels at home right now. And when gasoline hit $4 a gallon, there was a lot of people making biofuels in their garages because they didn't want to pay it. By the way, T. Boone Pickens was a big fan of having natural gas for fleet vehicles. And boy, there's a lot of natural gas. It's America is the largest producer in the world for that. I love energy. Actually, it's true. I've never owned an Ether my entire life. I've never had a wallet with an Ether. Let's see if we have anything else here. All right. Come on, guys. I want to end the AMA with a good question. Give me something interesting. Yes, I've been watching Westworld. Big fan of the show. I even listened to the podcast from those guys. What's the name? The name will come to me in a minute, but I even listened to their podcast about it. It was just a really great show. I really enjoyed it. 6 foot. Wisecrack. That was the name. The YouTube Wisecrack series. And yes, Lars will be holding online courses. Game of Thrones holding off on. Wait until the whole season's done. All right, let's see. Come on, guys. Give me something nice. You know, if people keep talking about Satoshi, one of these days I think I'll just pull out my old number theory books and look up the NFS CIF and pull out a lot of computing power and break Satoshi's PGP key and then sign something like Satoshi is dead so people leave it alone. Or maybe just release the private key associated with it so that that'll be the end of it. No one can verify. And yes, doing keto and IF. I really do need to invest more time in my health. You know, when I first started my company, I was 190 pounds. I was in great shape. I'm 235 pounds. I was actually 245. I lost about 10 pounds. And I know all the things I need to do to keep healthy and stay in shape. We you know, advantage of being rich and having access to doctors and other things is they can tell you unlimited advice. But the problem is you always regress to the minimum amount because you're so busy and there's so many things to work with. You know, my schedule usually is about 100 hours a week. And it's tough, and the travel is really tough too. That's why when people say I'm just having fun traveling out, it annoys me so profoundly. It is not fun. You get stuck at airports. You know, you get a hotel. Like you fly into Singapore, you get your hotel at 7 a.m. They say sorry, check-in time's at 3 p.m. And you just look at them and be like, dude, I spent 20 hours getting here. You're going to tell me I have to wait hours to check into my room. I just want to sleep. And they say, so sorry, it's Singapore. What are you going to do? I mean, that's fun. That's exciting. That's a vacation. Come on, guys. Not a Guinness man. My favorite beer, I very rarely drink beer, but if I drink, it's Sam Adams Winter Lager. And when I'm in Greece, it's Mythos. That beer is really good. And there's something in Switzerland I drink at the ale houses that they have there. I always have to have somebody with me. Yeah, I know David Schwartz. He's a nice guy. David's a really good guy. Um, he's very pragmatic. So he's just crazy enough to be entertaining, but not quite crazy enough to be having conversations with himself. The best ramen in Tokyo is in Shibuya. 50 different places, they're all good. And I am a Scotch man. That's true. I actually drink whiskey. Glenmorangie Signet and occasionally Macallan 21. Although Hibiki and Yamazaki is really good whiskey, especially the 30-year-old Hibiki that they have in Japan. There's some good stuff there. Okay. All right, we got about 5 minutes. What am I going to do? Come on, give me something good. Have you met Bill Gates? Oh, that's a good way of ending it. You know, I was in Miami at the UIUC Summit, and we were in a meeting with one of our partners, and I had my phone off because when I take meetings with people, I turn my phone off or I put it in my pocket, put it on silent because it's a sign of respect. And it was like a 2-hour meeting, very long, involved meeting, and we just finished it. And I look at my phone, and I got like 60 messages on my damn phone. I was like, what is going on here? And I look at it, and our marketing director, she was next door, and she said, you have to come next door to this bar next door, next to the hotel. You have to come. You have to come. So I ran into her later that day, and I said, what's going on? Why did you send me so many messages? And she said, never believe who I just met. I said, who did you just meet? She said, I saw Bill Gates. And I was like, no shit. You saw Bill Gates. We were staying at the Lowell Hotel in Miami Beach, right next door to the Lowell Hotel. Bill Gates was there drinking with some friends. And she was just watching him for like 10 minutes, talking to this guy. It's clearly Bill Gates, sounds like him, looks like him, talking about Warren Buffett, doing his Bill Gates stuff. And she goes up to him and talks to him for a few minutes and mentions our company and so forth. And I was literally next door, and she kept trying to get me to come over and talk to him. And I have a lot of friends who know him, and we've worked with people who have directly worked with him, like Khalid Bamba and Bruce Fenton. And we just missed each other. And I thought that would have been the coolest picture for Twitter, just to mess with people and say, like, what are they doing with Bill Gates? But, next time we'll see him. Although what a coincidence to say, we did this huge summit and Bill Gates happens to be in town. Anyway, so never met him. But Bill Gates is actually very relevant for the type of stuff we do. His organization gives away $18 million a day. Private organization, $18 million a day. And they've had profound impact throughout Africa. Many of the agencies we want to work with are controlled by or influenced by, in some way, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they're just doing great work. So, at some point we'll rub shoulders with them, and at some point we'll do something with them. But that